Steve Fox, a boxing champion. At the time of his introduction, he was probably the most unique character in the game. Dr. B doesn't count, okay? Steve used to be a character who actually had an engaging story, and that is not something that we can say for him nowadays, as he is let down by the writers given that he became a joke like never before. Having a new voice only emphasizes that even more.
That's a knockout! Good night.
So how did we get here? From a serious character with an arc that was supposed to reveal Steve's mystery and which was supposed to have a satisfying conclusion, to now being added to a group of the biggest dunces in the series. This is a story of Steve's tragic downfall. Steve's first appearance is in a fourth game of the series. His reason for joining the tournament is a bit far-fetched, but it's still something. You see, Steve never knew his parents, and he always wanted to find them. That's why he became a boxer. Ever since he was a kid, he was hoping that fame would reunite him with his parents. A smart kid, I must say. And even though he is a famous boxer, his life isn't perfect, as he is in problems with the mafia of all people. They're chasing him for defying their orders to throw a boxing match. Think of Bruce Willis in Pulp Fiction or Brad Pitt in Snatch. The mafia leaves Steve feeling like his time on Earth is running out. In fear for his life, he flees to the USA, and that's where he gets inspiration for joining the tournament. He feels that winning this tournament might be his last hope for finding his parents and finding out the truth about them and also about the scar on his hand. This story is awesome in my opinion. It's layered, inspired by pop culture and clearly crafted with care, something we won't always see in the future. Steve's ending scene is also really cool, as it is a three-parter between Nina, Lei and our main man Steve. In Steve's particular scene, we find out that he is actually a tube baby that was conceived in Mishima Zaibatsu lab, with the biological mother used for the experiment being none other than Nina Williams, who was in a cryosleep during that time. Anyway, the mafia tries to assassinate Steve and he is saved by Nina, who also tries to assassinate him, but she knows who he is, so she can't do it. After seeing that he was saved by Nina, he chases after her and realizes that she is his mother, but they are both interrupted by Lei, who is on the hunt for Nina. Steve saves her from Lei as she runs off into nothingness. This is also really cool, as it seamlessly sets up a plot for the next game. We now know that Steve is a GMO baby and that Nina is his mother, so this gives both characters an opportunity for a good story in the future games. While Steve didn't technically win the tournament, making this encounter non-canon, it's still a critical piece of his story, as the revelations carry over into later games. That means that this is both important and interesting, and it also gives us a reason to care for Steve. But this is just a start, and the rest of this awesome story is covered in the next game. In Tekken 5, we find out that Steve knows about his past because of Lei Wulong's help, and not because of him winning the tournament. So we are now certain that he is Nina's son and an experiment of Zaibatsu. This is enough of a reason for him to join the tournament, as he wants to stop Zaibatsu's evil experiments by destroying the company entirely. This is just a continuation of the previous game, but it only made sense doing it this way, as the story was left pretty open-ended before. Unfortunately, we don't get any encounters between Steve and Nina. That might happen in the future though, as not everything is resolved yet. Maybe the writers are hyping up that big encounter. With games coming out every few years back then, it was easier to build a story that felt like it was building towards something. Today, with games coming once in a decade, we forget that something was supposed to happen in the first place. In canon timelines, Steve doesn't win the tournament, but the non-canon ending is mostly similar to canon one. We see that he would destroy the Zaibatsu with his bare fists, it seems. A bit dramatic, but I can see that he's pissed and looking for closure. He eventually does blow the lab up, and this is still a serious and rewarding moment. He is not a joke. Yet, even though Steve's story isn't bad, we already see that it's starting to lose its steam, as his reason to join the tournament is not as strong as before, but the one positive is that he does get some closure by destroying the lab. He doesn't encounter his mother though, so that is a minus in my book. Also, we don't know what happened to the Mafia, they just forgot about Steve and forgave him, I guess? If you overanalyze Tekken stories like I do, you tend to find a lot of dead ends like this, and it really pisses me off sometimes. But I can't really influence that, so I'll just move on to my least favorite game in the series. But before I do that, make sure to like and subscribe, as it really helps me out. Thanks for doing that, and let's head on to the next game. Tekken 6 definitely feels like the laziest game in the series story-wise. Not only did they make a Tekken Force game mode to carry the story, but they even removed the prologues we had in the previous two games. There is no cool narrator anymore. There are now only text boxes with 2 or 3 different illustrations. But presentation wasn't the only thing that was ruined here. It's our boy Steve as well. Steve's previous game ending was in fact canonical. He did destroy that lab from his ending movie, only he wasn't the winner of the tournament. This story mentions that, but doesn't tie into it in any way, as the writers decided that Steve shouldn't have any more beef with the Zaibatsu now that he destroyed their lab. So he's paired up with the biggest idiots of the series, Paul and Law. I've done videos on both already, so check them out up there. Anyway, the Three Stooges are paired up because there are no boxing tournaments for Steve to participate in, ever since Jin started a world war. So Paul and Law invite him to train with them, and Steve joins the tournament as it is the only one still taking place in the world right now. There's also a subplot of the three of them splitting the money if one of them wins, but none of them do, so this doesn't really matter. Steve's story in a vacuum is not really that bad. It's just really boring and removes everything that made Steve an interesting character. However, what changes our perspective on Steve are the ending cutscenes for him and martial law. He's still supposed to be taken seriously, but when the writers do this to him, you can see that it becomes a bit harder to do so. The character just loses all of his credibility pretty quickly. This stuff happens to Harry in Dumb and Dumber and not to a serious character like Steve. This shift in character is certainly in the wrong direction. His ending takes place in the same house, but it isn't as slapstick as Law's ending. Even worse, it's just dumb. Zaibatsu soldiers deliver the money to the house that the three of them reside in, and that house is then blown up with Paul and Law still inside. That would imply that Zaibatsu is still onto Steve. But of course, this isn't canon, so this unfortunately doesn't lead anywhere. That's too bad, because it would give Steve something to do in the future, and it would be a good way to continue his beef with Zaibatsu. While this game didn't ruin the character completely, it put him in a situation where he just doesn't fit in, and I can't take him as seriously as before. However, it seems that the writers caught on and tried to rectify this with the next entry in the series. Tekken 7 really tried to make things better, but I'm guessing that all of their budget went on the main Mishima storyline, as the rest of the characters get a really minimalistic story. The worst we've had. It's just a paragraph of text and a cutscene after a single fight. Steve finally gets a chance to meet his mother, who is the same age as him by the way. That must be really confusing to poor Steve. This meetup was supposed to be a big thing, as it was brewing ever since Tekken 4. We finally got to see the canonical meetup after 3 games. However, unfortunately for us, we got this grand reveal in a game where side characters are treated the worst they've ever been. Steve follows Nina for some time and finds her in a cathedral. Nina tries to run away, and the two of them fight. Once Steve defeats Nina, he tells her a bit about herself, but Nina is clearly not interested and she didn't know that Steve even existed until recently, as the experiment was mostly a failure. This interaction doesn't go much further. Nina tells Steve that she will never see him as her son because he's just a tube baby, and while she's giving that speech, in true Nina fashion, a conversation is abruptly interrupted as she has to run away from Tekken Force commandos. Yeah, that's all we get. Story stays stagnant once again. At least Steve gets some closure as he now knows for certain that Nina is his mother. But us, the audience, already knew that since 2001. We don't get closure, we are only given information that we already knew. Come on writers, we want more new good stories please. You used to do that before. Characters had evolving stories. Steve's mother Nina had 3 or 4 different story plots by now. Why does Steve only get one in his entire existence? It seems that most of the characters have just been stuck in the same place since Tekken 5. You just recycle the stories for 20 years now. Please write something new for us guys. As you can see, this was a return to the good story, but unfortunately it didn't turn out to be much, as there was simply almost nothing to do with this format of a single episode and a 45-second cutscene type of story mode for side characters. I haven't seen Steve's Tekken 8 story yet, so hopefully that one is better. Even though, given that the ending that is almost unmissable on Tekken YouTube, I can guess that it's probably not. First of all, I'm happy to say that Steve featured in the main story for the first time ever. His role is minor, but it was just nice to see him there, as some characters didn't even get to feature. It's also really nice to see him helping people recover from the chaos that Jin and Kazuya created in New York, so that's always something. And I don't have a problem with any of this stuff, but that's mainly because there isn't much happening, so there isn't anything to complain about. But his other story, the one where he is the main guy, is just something else. Steve supposedly got closure in his last encounter with Nina, and that wasn't entirely positive for him, as it left him depressed once again. So we are now just recycling storylines, even though we figured out that Tekken 6 was a mistake. Once again, the announcement of the tournament helps Steve break from depression, as he tries to change his future, now that he realized he can change his past. A non-canonical timeline shows us that if Steve won the King of the Iron Fist tournament, he goes on to organize multiple boxing tournaments in multiple categories, with him being the champion in each one, the only category left being the heavyweight one. And this is where everything has gone completely wrong. Steve, a previously serious character who was part of Slapstick only once and never as a main slapstick guy, has fully embraced being a joke it seems, as this is what he looks like in his ending. By leaning fully into slapstick, the writers have erased much of what made Steve compelling and created just another dumbass. And we already have plenty of those. His new voice also doesn't help rid him of being a joke, as he now talks like he is part of some cartoon.
Smash! Fang! Claw! Shot! How does it feel to take a punch from a boxing champion? Hey, watch it!
This is not something that I anticipated, and it seems that Steve will now remain a silly character that is part of the 3 Stooges of Tekken. Even though they all started as serious characters, each one of them became a joke eventually. Some just needed more time than others it seems. Also, Steve's pairing with the other 2 never really felt right, as he was previously seen being friends with Lei, and that was only because of interest. So he wasn't necessarily seen as a social guy, but he can't be alone forever I guess. I believe that pairing him up with Nina in some way would have been better for both of them. Since writers decided to recycle storylines, it would have been intriguing to see something similar to Steve's Tekken 4 ending, where Nina is ordered to assassinate Steve because of his antics at the end of Tekken 5, but she just can't do it, as even though Steve is a tube baby and not her real son, she still feels deep down that he could be her family, so she is resistant to complete her job. A storyline like this wouldn't just deepen Steve's arc, but it could also give Nina an opportunity for growth beyond her archetypal assassin role. The worst assassin in the world, by the way. It would also be interesting to see more of that newfound rivalry between Steve and King that happens in King's episode. I certainly hope that they lean more into that than in the Paul and Law side of things. But who knows? Tekken 9 is probably a decade away, so all of my suggestions and rants will be long forgotten by then. But I don't know, I'm just ranting at this point. What do you think? Is Steve now ruined? Do you think that he's only going to get worse in the future installments like I do? Let me know in the comments. Also, thank you guys for watching, and once again, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you and goodbye.